Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. We begin in Winnipeg, where the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs and two families from the Long Plain First Nation in Treaty 1 territory held a press conference today to talk about the search at the Prairie Green landfill. Late yesterday afternoon, the province announced the possibility of human remains being found and an active investigation now taking place. With more, here's T.R. Wheatley and a warning some may be sensitive to some of the details.
It's damaged us internally.
In 4 words, Melissa Robinson sums up the past 26 months since her cousin was killed. In December 2022, the families of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron were told their loved ones were brutally murdered and their remains ended up in the Prairie Green landfill. To add to their pain, the Winnipeg Police Service told them there would not be a search.
We were constantly told no because it couldn't be done, or, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. But here we are, less than 3 months of the search commencing, and already, remains have been found.
A physical search of the landfill began on December 2nd, 2024, almost 2 years to the day the families heard the 2 women were victims of a self-confessed serial killer. This past August, Jeremy Skibitsky was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years for killing 4 women. Rebecca Contois, Harris, Myron, and the yet-to-be-identified person given the name Buffalo Woman. The same summer, after fighting a year-long political fight with the city, its police, along with the former Manitoba government and multiple feasible studies later, the families were told the feds and province would commit $20 million each to the search. A search that has close to 40 people doing shift work. Many of them are family members of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in this province. Earlier this week, the Harris and Myron families were called to the search site with news of potential remains being found. Jordan Myron is Mercedes' sister.
We knew those women were in there, and this is the day that we've been waiting for. Although it's a good thing that we found the remains, it's also very, very hard.
Morgan's youngest daughter, Elle Harris, shares how she felt leaving the search site.
Yesterday, when I left the landfill, I felt like I was abandoning her again. I felt like I was leaving her.
This isn't the first time Winnipeg experienced a serial killer preying on Indigenous women. In 2012, Sean Lamb pleaded guilty to killing 2 women, and charges were stayed on a third, Tanya Nipinak, because her body was never recovered. At the time, her family was told that she was likely in the Brady landfill, a city-owned one on the south perimeter of Winnipeg. They were told she would not be searched for, something that's lingered in the air for over a decade and on the minds of the families today.
We need to go back to Brady, where we know Tanya Nipinak is at. Again, I don't know how anyone sleeps at nighttime knowing that she still lays there, and we know she's there. So why hasn't the work begun over there as well?
Kyra Wilson is the Grand Chief for the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs and was the chief of Long Plain at the time the women were murdered. For her, if a search happened back then, there could have been prevention policies in place.
Right now is a prime example. If you listen to us, how many years ago, this could have been prevented.
She says with the alarming rates of violence on Indigenous women and girls, action needs to start now.
A major reason why we need to look at systemic change, and it needs to happen immediately. And we can't ignore this crisis anymore.
Meanwhile, the RCMP and the province's chief medical examiner are now investigating what was found this week. The province says the identification process could take up to 2 weeks. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
APTN News also spoke with Manitoba's Minister of Families and Gender Equity, Nahani Fontaine, who has worked alongside families of missing and murdered women and girls since the 2000s. Here's some of her reaction to the news.
What was told to be an impossibility or not feasible yesterday proved is feasible and is a possibility. And so everybody is gung-ho and motivated to keep going down this path and to ultimately honor the lives of Mercedes and Morgan and bring them home for their loved ones.
And if you're affected by these stories, supports are available 24/7 through the MMIWG support line. That number is 1-844-413-6649. Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Gary Ananda Sangari is in Arctic Bay in northern Nunavik today to give an apology on behalf of the federal government for its role in the Dundas Harbour relocation against the Inuit.
Between 1934 and 1948, the federal government removed more than 50 Inuit from their ancestral homes and relocated them to work at the Hudson's Bay Company outpost on Devon Island. The federal government tricked them into believing they would only have to relocate for 2 years. Instead, families were relocated numerous times without any support, no means of transportation, and expected to fend for themselves on a land they were not used to. At the same time, Inuit were used to assert Canadian sovereignty over the territory there. A previous study found that Canada ignored the unique Inuit regional identities and assumed that Inuit could live anywhere in the Arctic. Survivors spoke of starving during the relocations and people dying of homesickness. Those who lived grew up in communities disconnected from those around them. At least one survivor will be there to hear the apology today. However, most of them have already passed away.
And you can find more about the apology on our website, aptnnews.ca. The Nunavik Police Service has arrested and charged a school teacher with sexually related offenses. Nicholas Sear is a physical education teacher at the secondary school in Kuujjuaq, northern Quebec. The Nunavik Police Service says Sear has lived in Kuujjuaq and worked at the secondary school for the last 14 years. The police is asking potential victims or witnesses to contact Sergeant Investigator Isabel Suave or the Nunavik Police Service's Integrative Investigative Unit at 819-964-2400. Information can be shared anonymously and confidentiality. The Saskatchewan Ministry of Health has once again released a drug alert for the city of Saskatoon. Drug alerts are made available on the province's website to warn the public about areas that have higher risks of overdose. The most recent alert updates, one sent out less than 1 month ago. Just over 2 weeks ago, there were more than a dozen overdoses in a single day. Now the Saskatoon Fire Department has responded to 25 more overdoses this week. Between February 25th and 26th, Prairie Harm Reduction received samples of contaminated drugs, identifying 2 with potentially lethal ingredients. One is dark purple, testing positive for fentanyl. The other is light pink, testing positive for both fentanyl and benzodiazepines. Prairie Harm Reduction urges those taking substances in Saskatoon to first test them, to carry naloxone, and to never use alone. Homeless day shelter Resilience Montreal is on the brink of running out of money. It serves a mostly Indigenous clientele, and the shelter notified Social Services Minister Lionel Carment in early February that the shelter had not received their annual funding from the Quebec government and that it was weeks away from running out of funding. Resilience Montreal's Executive Director David Chapman says he received a notice from the minister's office stating they had received his email, but since then it's been radio silence. Chapman says there has been some good news. He told APTN News that the First Nations and Inuit Relations Secretariat has provided Resilience with $195,000. Chapman says this funding will only get Resilience through the next month and a half until it completely runs out of money. He says he wants Resilience to be in a position where it has funding for a minimum of 6 months instead of just 1 month.
Our annual operational budget is $2.2 million. Going into each new year, normally we have about half of that accounted for, meaning we have ongoing funding agreements where with, often it's private foundations or certain sectors of government. But every year we have to go out and find over $1 million what would be preferable would be if at least the majority of our annual operational funding could be recurrent and guaranteed.
Federal government has unveiled more than $240 million in funding to support housing projects in Manitoba. Federal Housing Minister Nathaniel Erskine Smith was in Winnipeg to make the announcement. The funding will go to the Affordable Housing Fund, the Rapid Housing Initiative, and the Indigenous Shelter and Transitional Housing Initiative. It will support 105 different projects in Manitoba to build or repair 3,765 units. The funding includes $9.1 million to help the Fisher River Cree Nation redevelop a building in Winnipeg into 13 transitional homes for Indigenous families. Construction began in 2024 and it is set to open in May of 2026. Fisher River Cree Nation Chief David Crate explained how the development will support Indigenous families.
Provide a safe housing for women and families that require this type of service. It's just been great, to have people here from the area, welcome us to the village. I always call it the village, but to this part of Winnipeg, and we're looking forward, continue building our relationship with the city of Winnipeg in this particular part of the city. Main thing, again, I'll have to state this, that this type of initiative will provide, we call it wraparound support services for the residents, which we believe is something that's really needed.
Time for a quick break, and then our Truth and Politics panel will be here to discuss the discovery at the Prairie Green landfill. Stay with us. Welcome back. As we mentioned earlier in the show, there has been a discovery of possible human remains at the Prairie Green landfill north of Winnipeg. For more on this, we're joined by our Truth and Politics panel. Jennifer Leywitz is the CEO of Pasqua Harbor Strategies, and Egon Sinclair is a columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press. Jennifer, we'll start with you here, and news late on Wednesday that human remains have potentially been discovered at the Prairie Green landfill, where the search for Mercedes Myron and Morgan Harris have been underway for the past 3 months. Your thoughts on the news?
First and foremost, deepest condolences and apologies to the family that have had to endure this. I don't even have the words for what they've had to endure since the beginning of this, from the fighting to even have this landfill search done, to now waiting every single day to hear news about whether or not something has been found, and now essentially waiting back to hear who it was that has been identified and when they'll be identified, and then dealing with the grieving process from there, both for the victim's family of the remains of the person that's been found, and also the family of potential victims that haven't been found, and that they need to continue on from there with the continued waiting process so that they can start their journey of truly actually healing. Very, very incredibly sad news. And all I can say is also thank you to the Manitoba government and Wab Canoe, who made a promise to get this search done and started, and seeing that come to life.
And Egon, I don't know if you caught the press conference this morning, but emotional criticism pointed again at the Winnipeg Police and former Manitoba Premier Heather Stephenson, and those who said that this couldn't be done. Melissa Robinson saying, quote, "To hell with you guys." Elle Harris, the daughter of Morgan Harris, saying to those people, "Do better." Did that cross your mind too?
Yeah, it was, and also a lot of talk of former Grand Chief Kathy Merrick, who was one of the proponents, and she was fighting hard to get this work done. I think that there's a bit of vindication for Grand Chief Merrick, and so there was a lot of talk about her as well at the press conference. I echo just my thoughts and hopes, and best love goes to the families of Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron, who they continue to search. Those families are searching for them, and that's something that I think we need to keep at the paramount, at the center of all of this. This uncovery or discovery or It is a moment in which we should ponder as all people within this country, all of us. When the Winnipeg Police Service came out to say, that they had found human remains, and they had actually found them months before that, but simply hadn't shared that with the public, and they continued to allow that landfill to continue to operate. They said it wasn't feasible. The search wasn't feasible. At that time, the search was projected to cost around $180 million. Wab Kinew has dedicated $20 million to make that search possible. And only after a few weeks, only after $20 million of provincial money, we have found human remains at the Prairie Green landfill. Now, we don't know exactly who they are, potentially human remains. There's some possibility they might not be human as well. We have to open up the possibility that they could be somebody else. And but it certainly says to you that what Wab Kinew said on media this morning is he said, we always knew the search would be right, but now we know that it was reasonable. This was an absolute reasonable request by the families of those who have experienced tremendous loss from a convicted serial killer. We should continue to search. We should not stop now. We should continue to do that work to support them, and most importantly, to find other loved ones that are all throughout Canada, including those at potentially unmarked sites at residential schools, where people say, oh, show me the evidence, show me the bodies. That's not the issue. The issue is that we need to be supporting people who have lost loved ones, Indigenous for the most part, and continue to do that more than ever.
Jennifer, the families here and First Nations leaders across this country have called for an independent inquiry to look into the actions and procedures of the Winnipeg Police Service and the province of Manitoba in their ongoing investigations, their initial investigations as well. Does this possible discovery add more fuel to that fire?
I think so. I think, especially in the last 6 months, we've been hearing so much about violence for Indigenous people at the hands of police, but also as we hear more about the tragedies that are taking place on our communities, especially with our youth and our young adults that are dealing with things like mental health and addictions and all of those things, I worry about what that uptick or that crisis might look like at the hands of law enforcement. I would very much not only like to see inquiries to police services across the country and the RCMP and Saskatchewan's newest Marshal Service, but also what type of training and implementations are being done to ensure that these rates of bad actions, to put it lightly, that are happening at the hands of police are decreased, and if not, eliminated altogether.
Jennifer Negon, heavy topic. We'll leave it there for this week. Thanks to you both, as always.
Thank you.
A new episode of Nation to Nation is coming up tonight right after the news. We'll get a preview after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. And it's the largest snow maze in Canada, and Jesse Andrushko, along with his family, enjoyed every minute of the experience just south of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Thanks, Jesse. Would like to get out there myself. If you'd like to be our next photo of the day, send your photos to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 5 above in Fredericton, 2 in Charlottetown and Halifax, -25 in Kuujjuaq, 21 below with snow in Nain, -5 in Montreal, 18 below and sunny skies in Chibougamau, -6 with snow in Sault Ste. Marie, 11 below with flurries in North Bay. Snow and -4 in Thunder Bay, flurries and -10 in Sioux Lookout. -17 in God's Lake, 14 below with snow in the Paw. -8 and snow in Winnipeg, 3 below with snow in Dauphin. -2 and snow in Regina, +1 in Saskatoon. -1 in Meadow Lake, snow and 11 below in La Ronge. In northern Alberta, -4 in High Level, cloudy and 12 below in Fort Chipewyan. 6 in Edmonton, 15 for Lethbridge. 13 above in Vancouver and Victoria. +6 in Prince George, 7 in Smithers. -20 in Old Crow, snow and 4 above in Whitehorse. -17 with snow in Yellowknife, 11 below in Norman Wells. -28 in Sax Harbor, 20 below in Pawlatuck. Minus 27 in Chesterfield with snow. 25 below in flurries in Whale Cove. Minus 21 in Resolute. 24 below in Arctic Bay. Over to our Ottawa studio now, where Fraser Needham is standing by with a look at tonight's Nation to Nation.
Here's what's ahead on Nation to Nation. I talked to Northern Affairs Minister Gary Anasandagri, who was in Arctic Bay, Nunavik, to apologize to relatives and families of Inuit people from Kingaid, who were forcibly relocated by the Canadian government between 1934 and 1948, causing years of hardship and trauma. APTN reporter Karen Pugliese is also here to talk about the Liberal leadership debates this week and where Indigenous issues fit in. As well, I speak to Quebec First Nation Chief Lance Haymond. Last week, his First Nation in Quebec won a major court decision after a federal judge ruled the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission failed in its duty to consult. That's coming up in just a few minutes after the news.
Thanks, Fraser. A once bustling port in Ontario, Depot Harbour, was devastated by a massive munitions fire in 1945. Today, members of the Wissahickon First Nation say explosives remain scattered and the land contaminated with industrial toxins. Coming up this week on an all-new episode of APTN Investigates, journalist Kenneth Jackson digs into the history of Depot Harbour and delays surrounding Canada's long overdue cleanup. Here's a preview.
This is where it all took place. These big ships would come in here.
No one in government talks about it. No one in the official level talks about it. It might be a secret military file. I don't know. Still
classified after all these years.
I remember that night. I remember the screaming and yelling and crying, people running. The sky was red and I could see the cinders, and I was afraid they were going to land on the roof and our house would be on fire.
They didn't clean it up, and I don't think they want to clean it up.
If you walk the shoreline there, you will find cordite. 2 loaded boats full of foresight were left to sink at the dock. And they're still there today. We're talking about explosives, stable explosive TNT in the water. It would be just as explosive as it was years ago as it is today. I think of all the other messes that Canada has got us in. We are left with that residue. We won't let them off the hook on that obligation.
Catch APTN Investigates Dynamite Bay airing this Saturday night on APTN. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. You can find much more over on our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech, thanks for being with us. Nation to Nation is next. We'll see you back here tomorrow.